Hello everyone, my name is Nick, and today we're going to talk about flowering houseplants. Many of the plants that we bring into our homes are grown primarily for their foliage. However, I think it goes without saying that many plants flower. So today I'm going to talk about 6 flowering houseplants and also how to care for them. The first flowering houseplant I'm going to talk about today is this lipstick plant, or Aeschenanthus radicans variegata. So this is a variegated variety of lipstick plant, and lipstick plants get their name because of the flowers that they produce. So they create these flowers that are red and look very, very similar to lipstick in their structure. Now, lipstick plants are in the Gesneriaceae family, so they are considered gesneriads. For example, an African violet, a very common plant, is also in the Gesneriaceae family. Gesneriads are a family that are known for their flowers for the most part, so this one just falls into that group of plants. However, how this one kind of differs from most of the Gesneriads that I am more familiar with is the way that this trails and vines all over the way, similar to a pothos or a Hoya, but it has the added benefit that it blooms quite profusely. This one doesn't have any flowers on it at the moment, unfortunately, but I will surely include some photos of the flowers so you guys can know what I'm talking about. This variegated variety that I have here has actually started to revert quite a bit. You can see here that these lower vines are pretty much all plain green compared to the older growth on the plant that has a lot more of that cream and white splashing to it. And you can also see with the plant that I have right here that the back of the pot is quite bald, as I do have this sitting up on the top of a shelf, and it's receiving a lot of light from the front, and the backside isn't getting any light. So there are quite a few dead stalks back here. So that's just kind of how I have my plant grow. And I kind of just consider it more character. When you bring a plant home from a plant store, it's going to grow a little bit differently, typically in your home, than it would when it was in the greenhouse. So just something to keep in mind when you have plants over a long period of time, that they might not look dead on the way as when you purchased it. But I always love a little bit of character myself. These plants, they do prefer a lot of light. I'm probably not giving this plant enough light, hence why it's not holding onto its variegation. However, you don't want to give it direct sun, like a south-facing window. I think it would be able to handle a west or east-facing window pretty well, but a southern-facing window in the northern hemisphere with all of that direct sunlight might not handle it very well. And one note I should certainly say is that if you give this plant a lot of light, or if you have the leaves wet and you give this plant a lot of light, this plant is known to get spots on the leaves. So it's best to not water this plant if you're going to be having it sitting in a bright area. So I might consider watering this in the morning or at the nighttime. So lipstick plants are really fun. I grow a few other varieties of lipstick plant in my house, but this one right here is probably the most common one that I grow. So I just wanted to share this one with you guys today. Next, I'm going to talk about another gesneriad. So this is an Episcia cupreata. Epicias, as I mentioned, are in the same family as African violets, and they have some really wonderful blooms on them. I believe Epicias bloom more profusely in the spring and summertime. I haven't had any blooms on this one since I brought it home. However, I've had another Episcia in my home bloom last summer, so I'm pretty sure that these bloom in the spring and summertime. The Epicias are a little bit more finicky plants. I do want to lead off by saying that they are finicky for a few reasons. The first reason is they don't like cold. They really can't stand draft at all. They do not like temperatures below 60 degrees, if I'm not mistaken. I think is what my growers have told me. I had one of these, a green one that I had shared in a few months ago in a houseplant haul video, and I had it sitting on my microwave, which is right next to one of the only drafty windows in my apartment, and I do keep a thermometer in that window, and it usually doesn't go below 58 degrees at the coldest, but that was still too cold for that Episcia cupreata, so just a word of warning. But the reason I have to highlight these plants today is they're just so incredible with all the variety that they carry. So you can see this one right here has some really striking purplish, almost brownish color to the leaf with this green veins. I really love it. There are so many varieties of Episcia. I actually am not too sure what this particular variety is. I really don't think I know what any of the varieties I have in my home are, because there are so many different plants that have like similar foliage but different color flowers, so there's so much to love about Epicias, let's say. But what I really enjoy about them too is the nature of the way that they grow. So they produce these little stolons, so very similar to a spider plant or a strawberry begonia. They shoot off these little vines or tendrils that just kind of start to hang low, and it will become a very nice hanging basket plant in a short amount of time. So I did purchase this one in a small 4-inch pot, but you can purchase Epicias in larger hanging baskets already looking the way that I am talking about. But these are just such incredible plants. They have so many different colors in their foliage. They have so many different colors in their flowers. Like I said, there is just so much to love because there's so many varieties. Every time I get these in at the store where I work, I always get like an assortment of like 5 to 10 varieties, which is just very exciting. I never know what I'm going to see, and it's so exciting to open the box. So for that reason and many others, I have to talk about Episcia cupreata for flowering houseplants. I should also mention before I finish up talking about these, they do not like cold water on the leaves. So if you do water this plant, if you're kind of willy-nilly with your watering, I would recommend using warm water. They would not handle cold water very well. And if you get cold water on the leaves, they typically get these kind of ugly brown spots to the leaves, or like it's kind of like dry areas. It's not very pretty, so just a word of warning in that aspect as well. But yeah, as long as you keep this plant away from cold and cold water, you're going to be in good hands. The next group of flowering plants I want to talk about today are Hoya, or wax plants. And the one I'm going to talk about in particular today is this Hoya lacunosa, which is commonly referred to as the cinnamon-scented wax plant. So it creates flowers that they say smell like cinnamon. In my experience, I'd say they smell a little bit more floral than cinnamon, but they do smell rather nice. This Hoya, the reason I want to talk about today is because this thing has been blooming out the wazoo for me the last few weeks or so. This thing... I've had it for like 6-7 months at this point, so I haven't had it entirely long. I've only been growing Hoya in my home for roughly 2.5 years, so I'm still a novice in the grand scheme of things when it comes to these plants, but I've been really enjoying growing them. I love the way that they vine all over the place, and I've been really enjoying in the more recent times how they bloom. So how to care for your Hoyas: you want to give them really bright light. You don't necessarily want to fry them in a southern facing window if you're in the northern hemisphere, but you do want to give them bright light. I'd say the magic area I find for growing my Hoya is like roughly like 1 to 4 feet away from a bright window. I'm growing this particular Hoya on my shelf, which is probably 2 or 3 feet away from a south-facing window. So it is getting a lot of bright light, but it's not necessarily sitting in like a hot windowsill. You do want to keep your Hoya on the dry side. The way to really ensure that is to use a well-draining mixture. So added to my standard potting mix, I do add a hefty amount of perlite and orchid bark into the mixture. I'm probably doing like 2 parts potting mix to 1 part perlite, 1 part orchid bark, and I think that's a really good well-draining mixture for your Hoya, particularly if you're growing them in a ceramic container, which doesn't wick out the moisture as much as a terracotta pot would. I'd say a terracotta pot would definitely be the best potting material to grow your Hoya in, because it's going to ensure that you're not going to keep the roots wet, even if you have a little bit of a heavy hand. But you don't want to water your Hoya more than once a week in most situations. I never like to give an exact day amount for how often I water my plants, because it's going to be different for everybody. But I'd say you're probably going to be watering your Hoyas in between once a week and every 2 weeks. That's probably going to be the magic area. So you don't want to keep them too wet. Stay dry. If you're still getting acclimated to Hoyas, or if you're just beginning with them, less is more. Definitely err on underwatering than overwatering. Next, we're going to talk about orchids, which I think would be the most commonly thought of indoor flowering plant. This one right here is a Bratonia, shelob Tolkien. This is a little bit more of an out there orchid, but I don't think it's necessarily hard to get your hands on. I rescued this from the bar that I used to work at, and I think they got all of their orchids from Trader Joe's. So I don't think this was like a collector orchid by any means. I don't think I see it at like the grocery stores that often, but I do think I've seen it there before. So as I said, not necessarily hard to get your hands on, just a little bit different than your standard moth orchid or phalaenopsis orchid, which are those standard orchids you see at the grocery store. But this orchid, as you can see, is a freakish clump. It has grown so much since I have brought it home, and it's flowered so much for me. You can see some of the flower stalks that are dried up back here. This one actually has some one flower on it, because I just knocked off the other ones, but just one dried flower left, and I actually like to save my dried orchid flowers. I think they're kind of cute, so I saved them in a little bowl. This one has a mind of its own and blooms whenever the hell it wants, but my phalaenopsis orchids tend to bloom for me in the wintertime. And my secret for growing orchids would be to be very hands-off. I'm very, very hands-off with my orchids. I water them probably like every 2 weeks. I give them a really good soak when I water them, but it's not very often that I do water them. I grow my orchids in sphagnum moss. Some people grow their orchids in orchid bark. Some people do it in sphagnum moss. I like sphagnum moss because it retains moisture a little bit better when you give it a good soak, but you got to give it a really good soak when you do water it. Versus orchid bark, I think, doesn't retain the moisture, so you would have to water a little bit more often, and in my opinion, it's just a little bit harder to judge when it's time to water. You also really have to give your orchids a lot of light. I'm growing this orchid in a south-facing window, and I grow pretty much all of my orchids in the very close vicinity of a southern facing window, so they are getting a lot of light. This one I'm growing right in the window, so I would dare to say I'm frying this plant. It's getting a lot of sunlight, and I think it really likes that. So very heavy waterings, but very not often waterings, but very heavy waterings, and a lot of sunlight seems to be the trick for my orchids, and that's how I've gotten them to bloom every year for me. But a really fun plant. There's a lot more to orchids than just your standard Phalaenopsis orchid. I am not a total orchid head myself. I know a lot of people get really deep into the world of orchids. I am not quite there, but there are quite a few of them that I really enjoy. So I do want to talk about them today. They're such wonderful flowering houseplants. Next, I'm going to talk about Spathiphyllum, or peace lily, and this one right here is a Spathiphyllum Domino, which is the variegated peace lily. So this one just has some cream and white flecking to the leaves, so it's quite nice. It's not a very heavy variegation. I think it's something that's really underappreciated almost. I think it's not like as heavy as like your variegated monstera, but it's a really nice variegation to this plant. I'm talking about this variegated peace lily today because I have the most luck with this particular type of peace lily. I've grown a bunch of peace lilies over the years. I love peace lilies. I love the look of them, but they do not love me, or I'm doing something very wrong. But yeah, I just haven't had some very good luck with them at all. But I gave in on this variegated peace lily last year probably, and I just fell in love with it. It's been a really reliable grower, and it's grown quite a bit for me. It's a really robust plant. As I had said, I'd grown a bunch of peace lilies throughout my time growing plants, but I haven't really had very good success with them. But I would say that the Spathiphyllum Domino is the one that I've had the most success with. I'm growing this one underneath a grow light. I do grow it right behind me here. It's actually typically on the floor right behind me on my right. And it probably sits about 6 feet down from the Soltech Solutions aspect light that I have in my plant corner. And I will leave the discount code for that in my description, but I really think that has done a number on this plant. It has made it really grow quite prolifically for me, and I love that it's flowering for me, because that's one thing that I never really got on my peace lilies in the old days was flowers. So not only do I get these beautiful variegated leaves, but I get lovely flowers. Peace lilies are very vocal. They will tell you when they need to be watered. They wilt very readily. It'll be very apparent that they are in need of water. So I'm very appreciative of that. You don't want to go too long. If you let them wilt for too long or too many times, they tend to not perk up all the way. But if you want to keep them perky, I would try to beat it to the wilt, or as soon as you notice it starting to wilt, I would give it water, as I do. So a really fun plant, a little bit more of a different version than your standard peace lily, but it's not hard to get your hands on it by any means. This plant is usually sold at garden centers for a very good price. So I highly recommend, if you're looking for a fun, easy floor plant that flowers, I highly recommend Spathiphyllum Domino. Lastly, we're going to talk about epiphyllums. So epiphyllums are flowering jungle cacti. Just for reference, jungle cactus include Schlumbergera, which are commonly referred to as Christmas or Thanksgiving cactus. So just for some reference there. But I actually don't have any Schlumbergera in my home, so we're going to talk about epiphyllums today. I really enjoy epiphyllums. They are really interesting plants. They've definitely been gaining some attention over the last year or so, but not that much attention. I don't think they're quite there yet on the popularity train. But this plant it's just such a trooper. This thing is parched. This thing has mealybug, but it still looks damn good, if I do say so myself. It's just got a lot of character. It's very hipster. It's very bohemian. This was actually a gift from my friend's mother a while back, and I've just been really enjoying growing it in my care. I have it hanging up in a south-facing window, hence why it's parched and probably why it has some mealybug. It's probably a little bit stressed out. But this thing is just so lovely when it does flower. It produces this large red purplish flower. I don't actually know the exact name on this epiphyllum, so pardon me there, but I will include a photo of the flower of this plant because it is absolutely stunning. I think this plant bloomed for me last April or May. I could be wrong, but I noticed a few other people on Instagram have theirs flower at the exact same time, so I think that's just the time of year that this plant flowers. Again, I can't remember exactly what time of year it was, but I'm hoping that this thing flowers again for me because it was beautiful. However, it didn't last very long, but as I had mentioned with my orchids, I do like to save the flowers of my plants when they bloom and dry them and then keep them for dried flower bouquets because I think that looks quite lovely. So I do actually have this dried flower in my bathroom in a little dried flower bouquet that I have in there. But these are really, really low maintenance. You don't want to overwater your epiphyllums by any means. You definitely want to stay on the dry side, and I think keeping on that dry side will keep it a little bit more stressed and probably encourage it to bloom. So I'm probably watering this epiphyllum every 2 to 3 weeks. I do pull, it's hanging up. It's a big pot. It's kind of annoying to take down. So every 2 or 3 weeks I'll pull it down. I'll give it a really good soak in the sink and check it for mealybug. Apparently I'll start doing at this time, but yeah, so that's what I'll do. I'll put it in the sink after I'm done filming this, give it a really good soak, and I'll give it a spray with the Captain Jack's by Bone-Eyed, which is a spray that I think works really well for mealybugs, so I'll give that a good spray. But a really lovely plant, really takes benign neglect. It's so wonderful. It can handle my care hanging up in a south-facing window, so I think it can handle practically anything. So epiphyllums are so fun. There are so many more types of epiphyllum out there. I'm just honing in on this one particular one that I have growing in my home for today's video, but they're just such fun plants. I highly recommend giving them a grow. Anyways, thank you guys so much for tuning in on my video today about flowering houseplants. There are some really incredible foliage houseplants out there, but there are some even more incredible flowering houseplants. So I just wanted to take a moment today to hone in on those. Do let me know in the comments if there are any flowering houseplants that I missed that you guys are loving at the moment. Otherwise, thank you guys again for watching. If you don't already, follow me on Instagram at Philly Foliage, subscribe to my channel, and I will see you guys in my next video. Have a great day!